Good to have you aboard with us once more for Agriculture Today. And ahead for you, first off, this week's cattle market commentary. And for that, we bring in, via phone, Lee Schulz, livestock economist at Iowa State University. Lee, we've an assortment of things to get into today, and including some thoughts on pricing feed in advance. And we'll expand on that further later on. But reviewing last week's trades on the cash and futures markets, what was the general tone of it as you saw it?
Really, fed cattle traded at a standstill from a cash market basis most of the week. When you look at packers, I think found it difficult to bid up cattle prices with wholesale prices floundering a bit. Cattle feeders, I think, weren't willing to go much lower. As if you look at one contract that was all right last week was the February live cattle futures contract was mostly steady. One big thing working against cattle feeders right now is the decline in those deferred live cattle futures contracts. For example, April is trading at almost $3 discount to February. June is trading at about an $8 discount to April. And so that's really not going to help support much of those near-term contracts as we're seeing those deferreds decline. I think what it's going to do is help keep cattle current, though, as you know, we're looking to market those cattle sooner than later. That should help out on the weight situation and be relatively supportive of prices, one factor helping support.
You mentioned those spreads, the deferred contracts to the nearby contracts. Are those unusually wide spreads, Lee?
I would say they're in the wide area or the wider area than typical. We do typically see a pretty large spread from April into June. And that discount does occur. That's a pretty big seasonal discount there. It does appear pretty wide to me at this point. I think it's really the backdrop of we're dealing with pretty tight supplies. Realize that we have larger cattle supplies now, but we've seen strong demand. The market's been very current, and packers have been fairly aggressive. But the tone is we know we're going to get larger cattle supplies. Feeder cattle supplies are increasing. Placements into feedlots have really increased at the latter part of 2017. And so those fed cattle supplies are coming. I think that's what's impacting those deferred contracts so much. And likely will narrow up a little bit as we continue throughout the year. The real question is, do we see those deferred contracts strengthen, or do we see a little bit of decline in the near-term contracts? I think what we've seen right now so far is a little bit decline in those near-term contracts.
If one scans the feeder cattle auctions, at least in Kansas last week, there still seems to be that thread of at least steadiness, if not a bit of added strength to that market, which may surprise a few folks.
That is the surprising market. If you look at across the cattle complex, is strength in that feeder cattle. Last week, when you look nationally, you've seen prices really $1 lower to $4 higher. On average, we traded higher than the previous week. Many market comments that I've read this last week really point to the quality of the runs that are showing up in those feeder cattle. A lot of these cattle are backgrounded, preconditioned, very well-performing cattle, and so we've seen those prices really bid up. Also, looking at the receipts, they're still relatively tight compared to what we've seen previous years, and even in relation to last week. Auction market sales, there was about 50,000 head less this last week than the previous week. So there's a bit tighter supply maybe, and that's helped those prices out as well.
There's an element out there we want to speak to from the macroeconomic side, and that is what we saw in the broader economy in the stock market drop-off last week, and those 2 days of rather sharp plunges in the stock market. Of course, that's an indicator of the overall health of the general economy, and then that spills over into beef demand. Anything to worry about there, Lee, in that respect?
It's something definitely to keep an eye on, because what's happening is it's impacting the futures markets and the trades that are being made, or at the prices that are being made. Realizing that drops have occurred. You can go back annually and find, a double-digit drop in the stock market in a relatively short period of time. So these ebbs and flows happen in the marketplace. From a hedger's standpoint, those events impact the markets, but it really shouldn't impact the thinking of producers. you're looking at protecting prices, declines in prices, ability to do that through hedging or buying puts. From a speculator standpoint, that's where a lot of this stock market, equity markets, how they're impacting commodities is what the ideas or the conflicting ideas. One idea is that, we've really had a robust, healthy economy, full employment, rising interest rates. We'll see some inflation, and that inflation will translate into higher commodity prices. So that would be drawing some money into the commodities. The alternative is where skeptics believe that the economy has been overheated, our debt is increasing, there's trouble on the horizon for several asset classes, including commodities, and we're going to see a big sell-off. So we're really trading those two impacts, but also there's fundamentals that are going along with these commodities. We have strong beef demand, but we also have increasing cattle numbers. And so there's a lot going on when you talk about the stock market as well as the commodity markets. The stock market impact is one piece to our commodity markets, but also, I would still focus very much on the fundamentals of these markets. Beef demand is going to dictate a lot of what prices do here in 2018.
And speaking of fundamentals, we have a new set of U.S. beef export data to consider. What did those numbers tell us?
So the data that was released was the wrap-up for 2017. It would have been the December data. 2017 was a great year for beef exports from a value standpoint, so it includes muscle cuts and variety meats. We exceeded $7 billion from a value standpoint. That's the second highest since 2014, which was the record year in cattle prices. December, we did see the value up a little bit, but the volume was down slightly compared to year-ago levels. Importantly, when we look at export value, and this really translated into the value of a steer, beef export value averaged $286 per head in 2017. That's up 9% from 2016. So when we look at prices in 2017, we're strong with higher production levels. It was because we were able to send a lot of that higher production to the export market. That translated into higher prices. And so exports were very important to where the situation really flushed out in 2017. It's going to replay itself again in 2018.
Lee, want to finish off with some thoughts that you have been sharing with producers about advance pricing feed needs for the cattle herd. And this, with the expectation of potentially higher prices in the feed grain complexes, that ties into this ongoing dryness that we see, not only here in the Central Plains, but in the Corn Belt as well.
Yes, interestingly, I've been getting a lot of questions about feed prices, but from the standpoint of, are we going to see feed prices much lower? And is this an opportunity to, lock in some prices, buy ahead on some of those feed? This is against the backdrop of we've had really strong feed demand, about 5.55 billion bushels here in this marketing year. That's the largest since 2007, 2008. So there's a really strong demand for those feed grains. But I think there's also an issue with potentially this dry weather continuing. If you look at some of the long-term forecasts, weather forecasts into the summer, into this next growing season, there is potential for this dry weather to persist. And we've seen what that can do to commodity prices, to our major feed grain prices. I think we've already seen an impact on the forage market and the hay market with December 1 hay stocks being pretty tight, pretty cold winter. We've fed quite a bit more hay maybe than we anticipated. So that market's already going to see some support in prices. I think the feed grain market, there's a little bit of concern there. And with where prices are at currently, I think that gives a lot of opportunity to buy ahead or at least put a price ceiling on some of those major components, as likely prices aren't going to get much lower. If they get much lower, I think our exports would really ramp up. That would help support prices where they're at. So right now, feed grain prices are one of the real positive factors when you look at the cattle feeding complex. Low feed prices are really helping offset a little bit of the higher prices we're paying for feeder cattle.
The question, of course, as always, is how aggressive does a producer want to be in advance pricing? And by the sound of it, you would think that the producer might want to be somewhat assertive about this.
I'd be a little more aggressive probably than I was a month ago, just given what the developments are. Definitely paying attention to if we do see a rally in feed grain prices. Typically we see a little bit of a spring rally in March, April. That may be a real signal of things to do. I may want to be ahead of that if that is a considerable rally. So again, I think, you can do some relatively low-cost buying calls that puts a price ceiling on there, just a little bit of insurance in case we do see a significant run in those corn prices.
Lee, thank you for the input, and we will catch up with you in a few weeks once more.
Thank you.
He's out of Iowa State University, livestock economist there, Lee Schulz, offering up those comments on the cattle market trends here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. This is Agriculture Today. It's been a period of adjustment for pork producers over this past year or so, learning how to successfully produce pigs without the use of antibiotics as a growth promotant. Antibiotic treatments can still be used on sick pigs. A number of pork operations have, however, been moving to minimize antibiotic use overall. And one of the featured speakers at K-State's Swine Profitability Conference last week here in Manhattan has been considered a leader and an innovator in hog disease prevention. He's one of the founding members of Southwest Veterinary Services out of Ontario, Canada. Doug MacDougald. He talked with the conference attendees about managing pig health with minimal antibiotic use in commercial production. His firm works with large-scale pork producers in Canada and in the U.S., and they're refining what they call the NAE program, standing for No Antibiotics Ever. First, says Doug, it's about taking on what he calls the big stuff. That revolves around disease prevention.
The key to success, get the big stuff right. Not having PRRS breaks, being mycoplasma negative, having great biosecurity, not introducing primary pathogens into your production. And if we get that right, then reduced antimicrobial use then becomes feasible because we can do that without compromising animal care and pig welfare. And then we get to sweat the small stuff. And this presentation is a little bit about all the little things that we have learned and focused on and as we move through the transition to No Antibiotic Ever NAE.
So then, what is the small stuff?
Data and information management, disease elimination, control and exclusion, weaning age variation, colostrum, farrowing room management, piglet management, subclinical anemia, barn setup and management, and finally communication.
And taking a look at a handful of those considerations here, Doug talked a great deal about data, tracking what's going on health-wise with the herd in as detailed a fashion as possible.
If we don't have continuous measurements and be able to interpret that, then we're dead in the water. And so the things we focus on are simple, concise, but complete enough to make decisions off of. We're in process of no duplicate data entry, real time, like daily, as well as closeout reports, web-based, inventory tracking for program, NAE pigs and treated pigs, and benchmarking internal. I put a question mark on external because in these days of markets and margins and contracts, then the opportunity to do external benchmarking with this kind of thing becomes, I think, a little more restrictive. Some parts of this now become market and confidentiality driven.
And, of course, if an operation is going to strive for minimal antibiotic use, facility biosecurity is an absolute. Doug shared an example of an operation he's been working with and how a breach in biosecurity led to a hefty loss.
One of the Ontario sow herds in 2016, May of 2016, it broke with PED. And we were absolutely devastated because we've got good biosecurity. We lived through 2013, 14, 15 with many, many finishers in northwest Iowa, and we did not break with PED in I think, any of those finishers, maybe one. And then we moved to Canada with our sow herd with a very low footprint of PED, and we broke with PED. We were devastated. And you guys have seen all these costs. I mean, we detailed the cost out of them, all the stuff that it cost us, and it was $100 a sow or $250,000, and that was without the U.S. space. So it ended up being $250,000 in total cost. So pretty big deal in our world. And we concluded the PED virus was on a truck or most likely cross-contaminated on the driver boots. Our driver protocol to get into the back of the truck had gaps, or there were gaps. The shuttle bus at the pig transfer was the vehicle for the virus, and cull sows or wean pigs running onto the transfer bus moved it to the barn loading ramp, and there were gaps in that protocol, so there was no washing of the ramp or shipping room at that critical point. So that was our best investigation on the windy path that PED virus got into our sow herd and cost us $250,000. We made changes. We got entrance barriers in Lyme, lunch pass-through, mortality removals located, new entrance protocols for supplies, no shuttle bus, always a positive pressure load-out with a sanitation plan, and a driver transfer.
What it amounts to is a balancing act, though, and Doug fully believes that the objectives of high-end pig production can be achieved while whittling down antibiotic use.
Our goal is to do NAE production with the best balance of treated pigs, animal care, and performance metrics. And why should we not be able to, and why should we not be expected to manage this where we can, match or exceed our metrics on conventional production? And that's our goal.
And their track record so far suggests that goal can be attained, although he says there is a long way to go.
Here's where we are this is the NAE. Since we started almost a year and a half ago. So 90,000 pigs approximately on the NAE program compared to our previous conventional through the same period of time. We've given up through that 90,000 average daily gain. Feed conversions have been fine, and our mortality in culls went from 2.7 to 3.4. So we've given up some on our mortality in culls on those total 90,000. Finishers, this is an interesting one. Average daily gain is the same. Our feed conversion to target, we were not hitting our target before. The targets changed, as I said, with some changes in ingredients, start and end weights, and paline are the key drivers on that. And we're better than target now, but not hitting where we were before on mortality and culls. That's our data. On the Alberta flow, it's not as pretty. Significantly less average daily gain total. Feed conversions higher, mortality and culls significantly higher. And that's the more problematic flow. And finishers, same good news story on the finishers with average daily gain, feed conversion to target, and mortality and culls on 70-odd thousand pigs. It's a work in progress on how we can get to our conventional mortality targets and what the balance is on how we manage that health and the level of individual pig treatment that's required.
What always speaks the loudest, of course, the economics, and those, to date, appear to be supportive of the system.
So what has antimicrobial use done with the NAE transition? And these are total antimicrobial costs. Injectable, water, we don't use any feed. And I might add that we've had 3 groups where we have population treated. The level of challenge was rising and we were not able to keep it under control and respond effectively to pig health and pig care. And so we took them out of the program with water soluble. So same we can treat sows. So we got sow and piglet treatments at 30 cents. And these are Canadian costs. 30 cents, 10 cents in the nursery So that reduced 50% from where we were. Finishers, we reduced 33% to 50 cents or so. So actually, and this is a U.S. number, so it's 90 cents total per pig. I can't sit here and tell you what our industry benchmark looks like, but those are our numbers and what the changes have been through that period of time with some of the snapshots of actual performance data. And I would say that it is all now about the small stuff, but we are really pleased with our current production metrics that are saying that at least some of those are better than they were. Our average daily gains are looking excellent. Our feed conversions are good, and we have got bright spots on mortalities in some of those flows, and we are investigating the others.
And there's one further element that Doug stressed toward the end of his presentation, that is the necessity for communication at every point along the operation.
Revamping our information system, our data collection, our reporting system, adding people, all the protocols and procedures that we have in place. The communication strategy is absolutely key. I mean, it drives everything. And it's, we spend time talking about this and continuing to revamp it to try and really achieve these key components of communication, with the absolute driver being continuous improvement.
Some of the remarks there from veterinarian Doug MacDougald of Southwest Veterinary Services, Ontario, Canada, on keeping up commercial pig production while ratcheting down on antibiotic use, potentially to the point of NAE status. Again, no antibiotics ever. This was the topic he addressed as one of the featured speakers at K-State's 2018 Swine Profitability Conference last week here on the Kansas State University campus.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. Adult and youth volunteers play a vital role in helping the more than 85,000 youth participants in Kansas 4-H gain the 5 life skills of a positive self-concept, an inquiring mind, a concern for the community, healthy interpersonal relationships, and sound decision-making. Kansas 4-H recently hired Shane Potter to oversee its youth development volunteer program, and today we have a chance to meet Shane. Shane, first off, maybe just a little background on yourself.
I've been in Extension for about 10 years. I started off in Nebraska and was there for about 8 years working on lots of different projects, animal science, career and college readiness, healthy lifestyles, the whole gamut of 4-H. And then I spent a couple years in Missouri as the ag science specialist for the state, and now I'm lucky enough to be here.
So you're a Midwest guy, so you're kind of glad to stay in the Midwest?
I am. I've always loved the people. I was drawn towards, staying in the Midwest, working in the ag sector as well as in urban areas. There's a general feel in the Midwest. People are kind and nice, and it's a great place to be.
And what's it that kind of attracted you to the volunteer specialist position?
Well, I've always loved training and development, helping people realize their full potential. That's really been my love in all my positions, is how can you remove barriers and really help people expand on what they love.
And do you find that people want to volunteer? They just need to be exposed to the opportunities?
Oh, absolutely. And, that was a draw for the position as well, is really looking at the opportunities. And in general, Kansas has an amazing 4-H program that can expand, and I think there's room for exponential growth. It's just tapping into some of those new volunteers that are already out there. And, looking at the position, really, it was more of opportunities that I saw. There are so many new potential volunteers out there, looking at the millennials that are there and how can you tailor the volunteer roles to really fit their needs. The volunteers we're working with now are different than 20 years ago or our lifelong volunteers that we had at one time. So it's how can we make our program relevant and really fit the needs of the youth that we're serving, as well as the volunteers that will help us get there.
And the volunteers are in all of the various programs that 4-H offers?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one strength of 4-H is not only do we have programs to fit the interests of youth in all different areas, there's a spot for every volunteer as well. So, we want people to be able to use their expertise. One thing that I think we have a lot of room for is trying to connect people with things that they love and they're passionate about and they're good at, and to bring that to youth so we can make that connection through the university, through different corporations, through small business. It's how can we let them use their expertise to really help youth and expand and show the opportunities that they could have.
Is there a typical type volunteer? I'm assuming you get young, middle-aged, older volunteers, all sorts of work backgrounds?
Yes, and really, again, there's a spot for anyone that wants to be part of the program. We would gladly have someone that's retired that wants to bring back and connect with youth, or someone that has a couple hours randomly that they want to just contribute a short while, or they want to become a club leader. There really is a role for anyone that wants to be part of the 4-H program. Regardless of their background or their education or what they bring, there's a way for them to contribute. My job is to help remove barriers and connect them with a place that they will be successful and enjoy working with youth.
In terms of people who want to volunteer, what kind of things do they need to know about 4-H?
And one thing we found is people might have a pre-idea of what 4-H is. It really is an organization that is growing and adapting and fitting the needs of the youth of today. So that's one thing, coming in as maybe someone that was in 4-H 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It's really grown, and the opportunities that we have are massive. So coming in and just understanding, what type of programs we have. I mean, there's amazing programs in science and technology, and the things that we have in agriculture, really applying science and food science and precision ag into those sectors is amazing. So it's maybe a reintroduction if they had a previous idea of what 4-H was and how they can be involved. And if you have no interaction with 4-H in the past, what is positive youth development? How are we helping youth be more successful and be prepared to be caring, contributing citizens in the future? So that idea of understanding what we're trying to accomplish is really important within the 4-H program.
And if somebody thinks, I'd like to volunteer, but I don't have enough training to do this, there's some training that they will get?
There is. There's a lot out there right now, and I'm really excited to bring new opportunities. How can we help people be prepared? Again, my role is to help them be successful. So is there in-person training they need? Are there online resources? Are there podcasts that they can listen to that will help prepare them so when they're engaging with youth or volunteering in any situation, they're comfortable? And, that's what we want. We want to prepare people to be successful. And so as the volunteer development specialist, my job is to help them have those resources. Do they have the proper training? Are they networked with the right people? We have a really amazing network of volunteers already established. Can we connect them with one of our more seasoned volunteers that can help show them the ropes? We have a great system that's already there. It's just making those connections for people.
And sometimes this might be as simple as just coming and doing programs for one of the local clubs.
Absolutely. Again, there's multiple levels of interaction. It might be coming in as a guest speaker and, sharing your expertise. It might be, leading a 6-week activity or coming in for a summer. There's so many spots and places that people could be involved. We want all interaction. The more positive interaction with a caring adult, that's what we want with youth, to show that they are understood and they actually care about their growth and involvement. That's what we're trying for, is to make that connection.
Any idea how many volunteers we already have on the 4-H side? I'm assuming it's thousands.
I think we're about 12,000 volunteers, so it's a strong network across the state.
Will you then be going out across the state, or do you do annual training, or is this just on an as-needed basis?
I think we're looking at a mixture of both. How can we prepare people through just-in-time training, so it's when they need that, as well as having, annual trainings where people can come in and get more in-depth training. So it'll be a mix. And right now I'm working on trying to get a feel for the needs of the communities across the state. So my plan is really to get out and explore and go to offices and engage with people around the state. So I really get a feel for what are the individual needs in each county and location, because Kansas is a large state and the needs are not the same in each corner, and we really need to find out what are those individual needs and how can I create the resources or do trainings that will fill the needs of those individual volunteers.
What might be a big program in one part of the state may not be as big in another.
Absolutely. And, we use content as a vehicle to get towards positive youth development. So it's how can we frame, is there a training on a certain content that they need, or is it a general positive youth development, how to be effective in working with teens? It's tailoring and finding what is that niche that they actually need to be successful.
That's Shane Potter, the recently hired Kansas 4-H Youth Development Volunteer Specialist. If you're interested in becoming a 4-H volunteer or just want additional information, contact your local extension office or visit kansas4h.org and click on the Get Involved tab. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wichman, thanking you for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.